Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Most people were horrified, of course, by last week's assassination attempt on Republican members of Congress, which wounded 5 people and nearly killed House Majority Whip Steve Scalise. But most people apparently does not include some people, including New Jersey Democratic strategist Jim Devine. After the shooting, Devine tweeted this, quote, "We are in a war with selfish, foolish, and narcissistic rich people. Why is it a shock when things turn violent? Hashtag hunt Republican congressman." After many people objected, Devine did not back down. He followed up by tweeting this, "I'm sorry if my hunt Republican congressman hashtag hurt the feelings of any GOP snowflakes, but you have not engaged in civil discourse," end quote. We invited Jim Devine to come on the show, and remarkably, he agreed. He's brave, at least. Jim Devine joins us tonight. So, Jim Devine, under what circumstances is it morally acceptable to use violence for political ends?
It's never acceptable to use violence for political ends, except perhaps in the most extreme cases. I'd refer you to George Washington and those guys. The fact of the matter is we do with ballots in this country what they do with bullets elsewhere. And it is not uncommon in politics that we use the language of war. We talk about fierce rhetoric. We talk about crusades and so on. You were on a television program, and I don't know what your body count was, when you were on Crossfire. I assume that there were no real casualties there. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody.
I mean, wait, stop. Don't, you know what? I want to have a reasonable conversation. I don't want to demagogue this. But in the hours after 5 people were shot, including the House Majority Whip, you sent out a tweet that said, hunt Republicans. I mean, it was clearly a reference to the assassination attempt against Congressman Scalise. It's hard to imagine how you could justify writing something like that.
In the immediate aftermath of the shooting at the Sandy Hook school, we've heard people say this is not the time to talk about gun violence. We've heard lots of things follow this. You know, this is a.
No, but that's not what you were saying. You were encouraging gun violence. Wait, hold on.
Absolutely not.
You were encouraging gun violence.
Absolutely not. I never encouraged gun violence, and I stated on my
what did you mean by that?
Don't
put down that
condone
paper. I'm talking about you, not some other paper. I mean, please.
But this is what's been out there.
This has been going on interested in what other people.
We see stuff like this, and this is not an uncommon
That's great,
thing.
but we're not.
We saw.
So your excuse apparently is other people have done it. That's not an excuse.
It's not an
I'm here to
excuse.
ask you about something that you wrote, and why don't you explain it? Why did you write hunt Republicans?
Is that for too long, Republicans in this country have failed to distinguish the differences between politics and war. And a lot of Democrats have failed to see the similarities. So you guys either have to tone down the rhetoric or we have to step up. And I don't think there's anything.
I don't think
hunt Republicans.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Sarah Palin put the crosshairs on Congress. I'm just saying hunt Republicans instead of Democrats.
First of all, Sarah Palin didn't do that. A group affiliated with her did. And it's a difference between a metaphor and actually suggesting affirmatively go hunt Republicans after Republicans have just been shot.
She put up a boast about her Republican bullseyes.
What point are you making? That that's okay?
What I'm making the point is that after year after year after year of hearing the same kind of violent rhetoric from the right, the left has every reason to come forward and stand up. What I've learned in life is that when you're confronted with bullies, you have to fight fire with fire. You have to stand up to them.
But a guy just went and tried to assassinate Republican members of Congress.
And that was it
just happened.
It was a terrible thing.
No, but
and one of my tweets, Tucker, said, it's too bad nobody did something before. And of course, Congressman Scalise was the guy that received
tweet, and of course
more
was
gun lobby
overshadowed
money
by
than
your
all but
suggestion
15 other members of the House.
Do you own a gun?
No.
Do you own a gun?
No, I said no.
Do you think that you should be able to pass a background check for a gun after tweeting something like that?
I don't see that this would disqualify me from passing a background check. But I
so
would be
you
happy
think
to
that someone, as a hold on,
I would be happy to subject myself to a background check if I wanted to buy a gun.
No, but do you think you should be allowed, or anyone? Hold on, let me finish my question. Do you think someone who tweets the day after an attempted murder like this, hunt Republicans, basically cheering it on, that person, in this case you, ought to be allowed to have a firearm in this country?
Well, first of all, your interpretation that I'm cheering it on is not accurate. I specifically said that I don't condone or advocate violence. That was within seconds, and in another tweet that said hunt Republicans. This is a metaphorical use of the term.
I do condone violence.
It is,
But
no,
if you could just answer my question, do you think someone who
violence, and
tweets
it was
something
a
like
metaphorical term. I've recently heard a prominent Republican say, I don't have time for political correctness. And I'll tell you what, I will make the time for political correctness when we have Republicans that aren't talking over us.
But if we could just get back, if you could just answer my question really quick and then we move on to the next one. Do you think that someone who tweets a line such as hunt Republicans or hunt Democrats ought to be allowed to have a gun as a gun control advocate? That's my question to you. It's really simple. What's the answer?
Absolutely. I don't think that would, in and of itself, define them as a person who either broke
someone
the law
going on to social media and advocating violence in the wake of a shooting. That's not a red flag or anything. Okay.
It does not
so you're not much of a gun control guy, I guess.
Shooting.
Yeah, apparently not. So your point is that Republicans, I guess this is your point, are advocating violence, and you're proving this by holding up a poster from 5 years ago. And because they are, you say now Democrats should? Like, what is your point? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that Democrats have to be more aggressive in the face of political issues, in the face of the opposition. We have members of people, one of the persons who was on that field who spoke about how terrifying it was,
what does that mean?
Was Senator Rand Paul. Senator Rand Paul retweeted something from Andrew Napolitano that said the reason we have a Second Amendment is not so people could hunt deer, it's so that they could shoot at a tyrannical government.
So what's your point? That
my
he deserved
point,
it?
Tucker, is very simply, no, absolutely not. But my point is that when you put up obstacles to people voting, when you secretly plot in the Senate to repeal health care that's keeping 50,000 Americans alive, and you're otherwise erecting barriers to the democratic process where we have elections where the people that get the most votes don't win,
that you should be shot?
What happens is, no, but that is tyrannical government. That's the point.
It's understandable when you're shot?
It's the natural culmination.
Stop with the talking points. Just get to what you're saying. I want to know what you're saying. Are you saying it's understandable when someone might shoot you if you do that? It's the natural culmination of the argument that was made by Judge Napolitano and Senator Paul Rand. If Senator Paul Rand would like to sit down and have an hour, Rand Paul, if he would like to sit down and have an hour-long discussion, no, but hold on.
I'd be willing to show up and talk about it.
Okay.
My point is that enough is enough.
What is your point?
My point is enough is enough.
So,
if it's worked for
time
the
to take up arms?
No, it is not about taking up arms. It is about coming together and fighting back.
Fighting back how?
Politically. Peacefully.
Then what is this about hunting and cheer? You know what? You're an unbalanced person, and I have to say it's distressing that more Democrats haven't disavowed you.
Well,
I hope
you know what?
will.
I'm a perfectly balanced person.
You don't seem it. Twitter isn't the only place where people have been politicizing the shootings of last week. It also happened on television with MSNBC's Joy Reid finding a way to suggest that Steve Scalise deserved to be shot. Watch this.
Everybody is wishing the congressman well and hoping that he recovers. But Steve Scalise has a history that we've all been forced to sort of ignore on race. He did come to leadership after some controversy over attending a white nationalist event, which he says he didn't know what it was. He also co-sponsored a bill to amend the Constitution to define marriages between a man and a woman. He voted for the House health care bill, which, as you said, would gut health care for millions of people, including 3 million children. And he co-sponsored a bill to repeal the ban on semi-automatic weapons. Are we required in a moral sense to put that aside at the moment?
Jessica Deloche is a Democratic strategist. Katie Pavlich is an editor at Town Hall. They join us both tonight. So, Jessica, if you could just parse that Joy Reid essay for me, if you would. He disagrees. She's basically saying he disagrees with me on gun control, on health care, on gay marriage. And he spoke to a group I don't like. Therefore, should we feel bad about him being shot or not? That seems to be what she's saying.
Well, I think everything that Joy Reid decided to talk about wasn't very smart. It wasn't very opportune. I mean, if you think about what topics she brought up, how are any of those things relevant to what happened to Scalise? They weren't. I mean, this is a person who has had an attempt made on his life. He's nowhere near being okay, and yet we're having to have a conversation now about votes that he's made in the past. I mean, I don't even understand how any of that is relevant, and it's really unfortunate that that's the conversation that Joy Reid decided to have then.
Well, I don't think it was an accident, and I do see how it's relevant to Joy Reid and many people on the left, Katie. I think she's basically saying, look, this guy's disgusting, so, how upset should we be that he was shot? Maybe not so upset.
Well, first, I think it's important to point out that Joy Reid started her segment by saying we wish the congressman well. I don't actually believe that. I think that she doesn't wish the congressman well. I think in terms of the issues that they're bringing up, this is a smear campaign. She essentially accused him of being a racist as he lays in a hospital bed, unable to defend himself, when the racism story has been thoroughly debunked, even by reporters who initially accused him of racism. Look, you had the Democrat on before this. This has now become a mainstream argument. As you said, it's disconcerting that more Democrats aren't condemning this. And look, I agree that we need some kind of civility, some kind of decency, but I would really appreciate it if the left would stop lecturing conservatives about civility, which is really just a way to shut them up, while they don't do the same and uphold their end of the deal.
Yeah, I don't even care about civility. I'm just worried about violence. Here's Scott Pelley, Jessica, describing the shooting of last week. Watch this.
It's time to ask whether the attack on the United States Congress yesterday was foreseeable, predictable, and to some degree self-inflicted. Too many leaders and political commentators who set an example for us to follow have led us into an abyss of violent rhetoric, which, it should be no surprise, has led to violence.
So 5 Republicans get shot, and Scott Pelley, who no longer, thank heaven, is in that chair, describes it as perhaps self-inflicted. What does that even mean?
Well, I think it's incredibly unfortunate. I mean, it's garbage rhetoric. That's not the conversation that we should be having right now. There are people who had an attempt made on their lives. Had someone not been there to stop that shooter, all of those people could have lost their lives. And this is a conversation that some people on the left have chosen to have, and I think all of it is bad. And I think that more people do need to stand up and say that it's bad. More people on the left do need to have that conversation. I don't think that 2 wrongs make a right. I don't think that this is the time for people to come forward and say, you know what, maybe we should just try things a different way since we've been too peaceful beforehand. No, that's not what's happening here. You have people who are taking advantage of a tragic situation, and they're doing it to score political points, and I think that's going to backfire on the Democratic Party. I think all of it is terrible.
Yeah.
Well, it could hurt the entire country, Katie. I mean, it's moving in that direction, it feels like.
Well, I would say the Democrats need to start making better arguments that aren't necessarily dehumanizing, but uphold their policies and talk about why what they believe in is going to be better for their constituencies, which they have far fewer of now. But in terms of how we move forward and the questions that have been asked and the issues that have been raised here, this is a mainstream accusation that the left and the media, their friends in the media, have made. This is not something that is on the fringe anymore, and it just goes to show that the far left, all they want is to meet their end, and they'll use any means to get there. And in this case last week, it was violence.
This can't be all made about the far left.
Self-inflicted.
I mean,
but I mean, in this case,
yeah, this is
self-inflicted. So we're out of time, but I mean, just imagine you all are on TV a lot. Imagine that script going through the layers of editors before it gets into a teleprompter and some hair hat reads it. Self-inflicted, really?
Well,
I mean, that's just totally insane.
How is it that Republicans are being blamed for this here? I mean, that is the big question.
Where's the president? The president has engaged
Jessica, Katie, I'm sorry, we're out of time.
Ever since he's been in office.
Ate up key moments. Thank you. I'm sorry. We got to go. Thanks for both of you. President Trump lashed out last weekend against the witch hunt he says is targeting him for obstruction of justice. Up next, we'll talk to a Harvard law professor who agrees with Trump on basically nothing, but he does agree this investigation is essentially ridiculous.